right, so I want to draw your attention to this picture over here. How many of you guys recognize this picture? Recognize the characters in this picture? Okay, this is all the way back in 1960. And this is the first televised presidential debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. Over 70 million Americans tuned in on television to view this handsome, charismatic, tan JFK verbally spar with a pale and sickly and kind of gimpy-kneed Richard Nixon. It's kind of interesting. I found that picture comparing the two of them together. Nixon had just gotten over the flu, and he had also banged up his knee like 2 days before, and so he was standing kind of sideways throughout the debate. People were wondering, and just kind of the visual was really of impact. Most people thought that the debate itself was a toss-up, that both candidates had performed really, really well, and yet the people that viewed it on television, it was a landslide victory for JFK. JFK seemed like he was just more presidential. They could just see him in that role, and he would go on in November to win the election. Now, the DNC and the GOP, they both learned a really, really valuable lesson on that night. It's the visual optics are a game changer. That we pay attention to the external things. They play a huge role in how we view and value people. And we all do it, right? We all look at kind of the externals, and at least it has an influence on how we see or how seriously we take someone. But God looks at us differently, doesn't God do that? God is so much more concerned about us on the inside. God is so much more concerned about who we're becoming as a person than what we actually do. God is concerned with our hearts. Well, this morning, we continue on in a teaching series entitled After God's Own Heart. It's a study of 1 Samuel, and we're learning lessons along the way, making our way basically chapter through chapter in 1 Samuel. So help me out, interact with me just a little bit. What is it again to be after God's heart? We've talked about it each week. What does it mean to be after God's heart? Anybody remember anything that we've talked about? It's been a whole week. I know. We talked about how it's orienting ourselves towards God, the way that sailors orient themselves to where they're chasing after, they've kind of they're navigating life towards God, chasing after God. It's loving the things that God loves. It's valuing the things that God values. And maybe even opposing the things that God opposes. And on full display in our text today is us being able to see very, very clearly what God values, that God values our hearts, who we are on the inside. Jeremiah 31:33, this is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. They will be my God. I will be their God, and they will be my people. It wasn't enough just that the people learn the laws of God, that they have them in their minds, but the law had an intention. The law had an intention that we would actually come to know God, that God's laws would become a part of us. And so it wouldn't be about rule following anymore. It would be about being after God's heart and God's heart becoming our heart. That's what that verse means. That's when we're the people of God. When God's laws and all of that become a part of who we are, and then we see beneath and broader than just the rules. So let me just ask you the question: what is your natural tendency when it comes to when you look at people? How are you more influenced by the outer metrics or the inner metrics? The outer metrics, basically, of just how someone presents themselves. How articulate are they? What kind of clothes they're wearing? I mean, where do they live? What is their title? What kind of influence they have? And those are it's not as though those things aren't important. I mean, there's some importance to that. We can pay attention to that. Or are we looking a little bit deeper? Are the more important things the deeper things, like character? Like the way that a person expresses love, or a kindness, or a goodness, or a wisdom that's deeper? Is that what we really value someone? How we really kind of make our decision about value of someone, the way that they're compassionate? Well, let's go ahead and jump to our scripture, because I think our scripture really speaks to this in a lot of ways, what is after God's heart. We're going to identify a few themes along the way. Let's go to verse 17 of chapter 10. So Samuel summons the people of Israel to the Lord at Mizpah and said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you." So Samuel starts off by leading the people to kind of take a trip down memory lane, recollecting all of the different times that God has come alongside them and provided for them and shown goodness to the people, reminding them about how God had delivered them from slavery in Egypt. And maybe remembering how God had provided for them throughout their time in the wilderness, and how God had freed them again from all of those nations that had attacked them and tried to oppress them. What the prophet is trying to do is lead the people to practice a discipline. It's a discipline of remembering, a spiritual discipline of remembering. Have you ever thought about that as a spiritual discipline? I was talking with Wendy about it before the service, and she was like, never really heard of that as a spiritual discipline. But how much would it benefit us if we on a regular basis looked back and surveyed all of the different ways that God has provided, all of the faithfulness along the way? Isn't that something that we could do as a church that would be really, really helpful, don't you think? Because we're such prisoners of the moment. I mean, it's been a week since God moved in a powerful way, and so we're like, God has forsaken. I mean, that's just kind of the way that we operate sometimes. We might not say that out loud, but wouldn't it be so powerful that we would be able to articulate our stories and remember God's goodness and learn the lessons from the past? You remember the old saying, smart people learn from their own mistakes, but wise people learn from the mistakes of others. So what if we shared our collective stories so that all of us didn't have to make all the same mistakes? So that we could move forward with wisdom. Smart people, well, I'll make that mistake, I won't do it again. But wise people, I see that others have made this mistake, and so I'm going to avoid that. That's where wisdom comes in. That's where we share our stories and we move forward with wisdom in a different way. May it be so with us. Goodness, let us not have to stumble along over and over and over. So that's how Samuel begins his message. Let's go to verse 19. "But you have now rejected your God, who saves you out of all your disasters and calamities, and you have said, 'No, appoint a king over us.' So now present yourself before God by the tribes and clans." Now, I want you to focus in just on verse 19, just right there at the first. But you have now rejected your God who saves you out of all your disasters and calamities. The thing that commentators really point to there is this is just a reminder of the freedom that God gives us. That we have freedom, that freedom plays a central role in our relationship with God. Now, freedom, as we all know, it has the possibility, it bears the possibility of all kinds of wonderful goodness, right? We are free to be good and to bless the world. We are also free to be evil and broken. And so there's the potential on both sides. We know that freedom is essential for love to take place. No one can be made to love, it's a choice. No one can be made to worship, it's a choice. And so God honors us with this freedom. Freedom to follow, freedom to love or to reject love, freedom to embrace the values of God or to make our own value system, freedom to accept God's leadership and to accept God's guidance or to just choose our own. I was reflecting this past week as I was reading this passage about freedom. I was thinking about the forefathers, our forefathers that came over and had this initial vision for this country. And their vision for this country was centrally around what? It was religious freedom, primarily. And if you dig a little bit deeper, you realize that about 80% of the founding fathers were clergy. They all had biblical training. They were all pastors in some regard. And so essentially, faith would play a very, very powerful role in the way that the country would be founded. But it was not a particular religion, it was religious freedom that they had in mind. They also fled. They wanted independence from denomination. A lot of the denominations in that day just lorded power over people and made their life miserable. There was also very, very little openness to freedom of belief. And I think to a degree, maybe we have freely created a system very similar in some ways to the one that we fled. But I want to tell you something that's really pretty cool about the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. The Christian Church Disciples of Christ is a very unique movement that very much kind of is modeled after that American spirit. The spirit that really, really prizes autonomy. Our church, our local church, and this is the case with all Christian Church Disciples of Christ churches, our church is truly autonomous. There is no one in some office in some other city that tells us what to do. There's not anybody in another office that tells us what to believe or what we should do in our community or how we should be structured or any of that. We actually choose that. We have complete authority and complete autonomy. We're in covenant with a larger denomination, but we are autonomous. And not only are we autonomous, but we have one confession, which is our confession of who Jesus is. We are Jesus followers. And yet all of the other details of what that looks like, who gets to decide that? We do. In the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, we don't have this long list of doctrinal statements that you have to agree with. We agree on Jesus, that Jesus is our center, and then we decide together what we feel like God is leading, Jesus is leading us to believe and to say and to do. And so if you're somebody that's kind of looking for a place, for an open space, to really be with the community and try to flesh out what it means to follow Jesus, this is a pretty good space for that. So let's go on to the rest of our passage. So when Samuel when Samuel had all Israel come forward by tribes, and the tribe of Benjamin was taken by Lot, and he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken. Finally, Saul, the son of Kish, was taken. And when they looked at him, he was not to be found. So they inquired further of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies," or the baggage. They ran and they brought him out. And as soon as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Samuel said to the people, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." And then the people shouted, "Long live the king." So the people insisted that God give them a king. And God obliges with a man that really, really looks the part. Saul is a man that stands an entire head above the rest of the people. In other passages, he's described as someone that is handsome and charming, and he has this commanding presence among the people. And so how do the people respond? They respond, "Long live the king. That guy looks like a king to me. Let's get him to lead us. He stands ahead over everyone else. If anybody's a king, then that guy's a king." I did a little bit of research this past week, and I found it really, really interesting. So in that day, the average height of a man was probably 5'3", 5'4". Okay, especially the men of Israel would have been 5'3", 5'4". So we probably could maybe guess that Saul was maybe 6'2" or so, standing ahead above all of the other men. So what's the average height of an American male? Anybody know that? 5'8", 5'9". Okay, 5'8", 5'9". All right, and there's only about 4% of men that are over 6'2". About 4% of men. So let me ask you a question. What percentage of CEOs in America are over 6'2"? No, you're a little bit dramatic on that, but I get where you're going. I'm getting guesses over here of 60 and 80%. But 30% of CEOs, though there are only 4% of American males are 6'2" or higher or taller, 30% of CEOs are 6'2" or taller. What does that tell us? We are so enamored by the person that looks the part. It hasn't changed an ounce from Saul to us today. If someone stands ahead above everyone else, then, that's our leader. Is it because they're smarter? Is the air better up there? No. Saul looks the part, but on the inside, he's a mess. There's insecurity, there's self-doubt, there's poor character, there's small faith, and it seems like in many ways God gives the people of Israel a man that really mirrors their own character. He looks really, really good on the outside, and he is a mess underneath. When we're talking about leadership, oftentimes, and this is an overachiever community that we live in. There's a lot of overachievers, a lot of people with great, great ambition and skill, and yet their character lags behind. And what we aspire for, of course, is somebody that maybe even their character leads the way. They might have ambition, they might be skillful, but their character actually leads the way. And that's what God is kind of leading us towards, is that we look beyond the exterior to see what's really important underneath. So, as far as leaders go, let me ask you a question. True or false? Are we all leaders? Are we? See, here's some truths. Okay, most all of us. I want to suggest that all of us are influencing someone, if not multiple people. All of us have somebody in our life that's listening to us, that really kind of leans in when we express ourselves, when we share our opinion or our perspective. We're mentoring someone, whether we know it or not. We're all leaders. And yet here's this last little thought that I want to give you. that's oftentimes overlooked. One of the interesting things out of this story is that Saul is found among the baggage. He's found among the baggage. The future leader of the nation of Israel is found among the baggage. We all have baggage, don't we? And Saul was no exception. But you know what I think about? Now we can kind of delve into, and we pointed to some of the baggage that Saul kind of carries along or chooses to carry along. But I'm so grateful that God still calls people that carry baggage. Otherwise, well, I'm resigning. I think all of us would be in trouble because all of us carry baggage. All of us carry our inadequacies. All of us carry our past failures along with us. And yet one of the things that is said very, very clearly is that the Spirit was with Saul. In all of his mess, in all of his blunders, the Spirit was trying to reclaim Saul and lead him into something new, to lead him beyond his baggage. And yet Saul, we'll learn in the coming chapters, Saul just couldn't cooperate. His baggage became too much. But the Spirit wants to lead us to a place where we embody this message about God that we've been given, that we've been liberated. We've been liberated by this message and this truth about who God is and who we are in light of this God. And so I want us to engage in a little exercise here right before we come to the communion table. It's the exercise of remembering. I think good, wise leaders, which all of us are, or we aspire to be, we should all exercise this spiritual discipline of remembering and how that leads us to gratitude. This passage, go back one real quick, this passage right here, and they remembered that God was their rock and the high God their Redeemer. And so what I want you to do is I want you to take just a moment. You can actually, on the QR code that's right here on your table, you can scan that in. And I want you to think about 5 different examples of how God showed you goodness. It might be that you might want to just think of 5, or you might want to think of 1 for every decade that you've been. And that might be a really great exercise for you to remember God's goodness, remember God's provision for you, and actually put that down, write it down, be able to articulate a story and allow that to become an anchor for you as you move forward, that you're always acting and leading in light of God's goodness and faithfulness. And so we move forward in gratitude. So let's take a moment or two, and then Amanda is going to come and lead us into communion. So take a moment, reflect, and identify your 5 memories.